Stanford University.
Welcome to the seminar on People, Computers, and Design. I'm Terry Winograd, glad to be here. Sorry I missed last week. Let me start off quickly with the logistic announcements. Some of you are taking this as a course, CS 547, for 1 credit. And the way you get that credit is by simply attending all the sessions. You can miss up to 2 in class, and then we'll sign a thing at the end of the quarter saying you've seen them online. Unless you are doing this by SCPD, in which case you can watch them all online. Well, it's easy enough to get credit at the end. If that isn't all clear, send me an email. We'll work it out. Leslie is the CA for the course, and we'll be passing around a sign-up sheet. So if you just come every week, sign the sign-up sheet, you are done. If you have missed some, then we'll do it by email at the end of the quarter. Nothing complicated. And as always, this is completely open. You're welcome to come, anybody, Stanford or not, to attend the talks. Because we get a great range of interesting speakers that are of interest not just to the HCI community at Stanford, but to the larger community. So, any other? I don't think there's any other logistics. It's pretty simple. It's on the website. Oh yeah, it's the other logistics. hci.stanford.edu/seminar. Okay, we'll get you all the information. This week we have Lada Adamic, who is from the University of Michigan, from the Information School, and has been studying a wide variety of ways in which information gets passed from person to person, the way memes get passed, the way social networking works. She's taking advantage of a sabbatical this year to be at Facebook. So she's actually local for the year, and if you have complaints about Facebook, you can tell her. I was interested, I took a glance at her webpage, and one of the articles on the front page is about the transmission of drug-resistant bugs in hospitals. So it's interesting that the same mathematics, the same sort of underlying theories that have to do with how we pass information from one person to another are also relevant to how we pass other kinds of things from one person to another. And I think that's, I mean, for me, this is an example of this whole new world of research that was opened up by things like Facebook, I mean, and its predecessors. But because we have such large numbers of people exchanging things person to person, instead of posting them as information on the web in the way it used to be, there's a tremendous number of really interesting phenomena to be explored. And today she'll be talking about that.
Okay. Thank you, Terry, for that nice introduction. So as Terry said, I'm here for the year. So if anything in this talk piques your interest, please shoot me an email and we can talk. So today I'll be talking about what some of these social network ties that we can harvest online, what they really mean. What does it mean to friend someone? What does it mean to trust someone when what you're doing is entering that into fields on some web page? So I actually first started looking at social networks in the era before Facebook. When I was a graduate student here at Stanford, I was in applied physics rather than computer science. And I think it was one afternoon when I was supposed to be doing some serious research that I thought about my web page and how it had, this separate page, actually, friends.html, where I linked to a bunch of my friends. TJ eventually became my husband. He was also a grad student here. And how did I come to link to my friends? Well, it wasn't really my idea. It was that a friend of mine had, or several friends of mine had, linked to my homepage from their homepage, and they said, "Hey, Lada, how come I link to you and you don't link back?" Right? And so soon enough, I created my own friends page, and I wondered, how many other people have been guilted into this? And I went ahead and I crawled the Stanford personal homepages, and there were about over 1,000 people who had either linked to or been, linked to another page, or someone else had linked back to them. And this was me kind of on the periphery, not too social person. But there's this hub here, Orkut Büyükok'tan, who is actually the one who introduced me to my husband. And he was throwing parties, and he eventually went on to create Orkut.com at Google. But before he did, he saw this, and I'd like to think that this was in part inspiration for Club Nexus, which he created, which from my point of view was just more data. You know, this is really, really juicy, and it had many of the same features that early Facebook did as well. You could search for people, you could blog, you could do lots of things. One of the things that Orkut thought about was, well, maybe you can say something about yourself. So there were a list of terms that would not actually be shown to anyone else. It was somehow supposed to algorithmically match you with similar others. So you could say, for example, how you enjoyed spending your free time or other attributes of your personality. At the same time, you're kind of publicly showing what was your major. And so you could just do some neat little statistical analysis. So for example, if you looked at the physics and math majors, they would be more likely than others to describe themselves as weird and to like to spend their free time learning, right? So this was the geeks, right? And the CS majors were more likely to think of themselves as successful and intelligent. The political science majors thought of themselves as attractive and lovable. Philosophy majors did not really think that they were too funny. And then you had, English majors thinking that they were sexy much more so than EE majors did, right? So there's just all sorts of fun things that you could get out of this. An especially fun thing relevant to this talk was that in addition to asking students to select these words to describe their personality. So remember, these are not shown to anyone else. So whether you think you're responsible or sexy or attractive, etc. And at the same time, he asked your friends to rate you on a scale of 1 to 4 on how trusty, nice, cool, and sexy you are. Now, Orkut was smart about this, and he wouldn't show you how a particular friend had rated you. He would wait until, I think it was 3 or 4 of your friends had rated you and then showed you the average score. So you couldn't really point fingers. And here, what we saw was that actually your friends tend to pick up on things. So if you privately said that you're responsible, your friends agreed. They thought that you were more trusty, but less cool and sexy. So these are all kind of average. The arrows denote kind of statistically significant trends. On the other hand, if you thought that you were sexy or attractive, your friends tended to agree, but they thought that you were less trusty and nice, right? Maybe finally, just to point out, if you thought that you were funny, your friends thought that you were less nice on average, right? Maybe you cracked too many jokes at their expense. So this is great, right? Like, we could really potentially use these kind of ratings, but how do we know that they're reliable, right? There are lots of people online. Which ones are going to be cool and sexy and trusty, depending on what you're looking for? And so what we want to know is, Amazon ratings of products are used a lot, right? But are ratings of products different than ratings of people? So that friendship edge that you have on Facebook, how did that really come about, and what does it mean? So I'm just going to cover the work from 3 papers which have examined this question with my collaborators, Edwin Teng, who's a PhD student of mine, Deborah Lauterbach, who is a master's student at University of Michigan and now is at Google working on Google+, and Mark Ackerman, who's a faculty member at the University of Michigan. Okay, so there's actually lots of related work on predicting trust in networks. For example, if you have partial information about who trusts whom, can you propagate those ratings for pairs where you don't know whether A would trust B or not, but you know that some other people trust B? So can you infer what A's opinion would be? There's also work by Yuri Leskowitz, who's here, and John Kleinberg and others on signed social networks. So if I trust you and you trust someone else, would I trust that someone else? Or, you know, if I don't like you and you don't like someone else, would that someone else be a good candidate for my friend? There's also a lot of work on just trust based on shared attributes. So social networks tend to be homophilous. So if you, if we share a lot of things in common, I may be more likely to trust you and your opinion. And then there was a poster actually on CouchSurfing.org examining the different ratings, and I'll talk more about those. There's also kind of a correspondence between what you see online and what you see in real life. So Eric Gilbert and Carrie Carhalios looked at, can you take interactions on Facebook and infer from those interactions what the real world strength of tie would be? So if we communicate a lot on Facebook, does it mean that I would be comfortable asking you for $100 that you could loan me? And there's also been a bunch of research showing that, for example, being on Facebook and having lots of friends tends to positively correlate actually with having a real world social life as well. And finally, they almost don't really need research on this, but anonymity in ratings. So anyone who has ever taught and gotten teaching evaluations might agree that anonymously given ratings tend to be maybe a little bit more honest than we really like. So why would these online reputation systems matter? So CouchSurfing.org is this hospitality network. If you want to travel to a foreign country or even a different city in the US, and you don't want to stay at a hotel, either it's expensive or it's boring, and you might want to stay with someone and even have that someone show you around, show you kind of the local, where the locals hang out instead of all the touristy spots, then you might turn to CouchSurfing.org. And as you can see, it's a network that really covers the whole globe. And an interesting thing is that from the very start, participants in couchsurfing are equally likely to surf, that is to stay with someone, or to host, to actually take someone into their house. Now, this someone is likely a stranger, and we actually interviewed some couchsurfing participants, and we said, how can this be? And they said, well, you know, it's just like you're riding on a train and you meet someone and they say, hey, come stay at my house, right? In one instance, one of the interviewees said that she and her boyfriend arrived in Brussels and they met their host, and the host said, here's the key to my apartment or house, I'll see you later, right? So how can that happen? Well, one possibility is that actually they had hosted that same person in the US before and they knew each other. But that wasn't the case. They had never met in person before. And in fact, in only about 15% of the cases do you have that when A hosts B, B hosts A as well. Instead, what you have is a large network where generalized reciprocity is occurring. So rather than I'm going to host you because you hosted me, maybe you hosted someone who hosted someone who hosted me. And about 1/3 of all couchsurfing users are in this largest strongly connected component of the hosting network. Okay, so you might have these ratings online, and now the question is, can you really rely on them, right? Because a lot of the couchsurfing users, in fact, glean information about the individuals they'd like to host or they'd like to stay with from online ratings. So what can go wrong? So here's a user, and he's providing a rating, and say he only wants to give whatever he's rating 2 stars out of 5. Now the choice is that that rating is going to be held privately, so no one else gets to see it. For example, the Karma, Nexus Karma ratings, or they might be shown publicly. If they're shown publicly, maybe the user can remain anonymous, or maybe they'll be identified. But if they're identified and actually the content that they rated was generated by another user, that user can potentially, you know, kind of rate back, right? So how can this affect things? So we looked at various systems. First was the straightforward Amazon.com. So here you have an individual rating a product. Then in Epinions, you have individuals, in addition to rating products, they're rating the reviews of others. So they're kind of indirectly rating other people. And then just directly rating other users. So on Epinions, you can say, I generally trust this person, or I don't trust them. And on CouchSurfing, you actually provide several different ratings of your friends. So CouchSurfing, we have all these different ratings. And, oops, sorry, I have this in the wrong spot. So you can specify, actually, let me get back to this one. OK, let's just do Amazon, because it's the simpler one. So the only variable that's changing here is whether you are rating under your own name, so real name TM, or whether you're using a pen name. And what we find is that in terms of the number of stars that you give to different products, there's not a statistically significant difference. So that's right here. So you're no more generous with your ratings when you use your real name versus when you use your pen name. However, if you're using your real name, you're likely to write a few more reviews. They're likely to be a little bit longer. And you're actually likely to accumulate more of a fan following. So these are other Amazon customers who will get notified if you write more reviews. So there's some effect for using your real name, but it's not in terms of how generous you are with your ratings. OK, so with Epinions, as I said, we have these two types of ratings. So you can rate others' reviews as to whether they're helpful or not, or you can say whether or not you trust others. So the research questions we have are, do these design choices really affect how honest people are? And then we're also going to look at what, in networks that are more oriented towards expressing friendship and trust, what friendship and trust mean once you try to translate them into numerical scales. Is it amenable to that? So for Epinions, first of all, this is when users are rating others' reviews, we can look at the light bars are ones where it's identified, and 5 here means this review was extremely helpful, right? So if I'm rating this as Lada, I'm very likely to say that your review is extremely helpful. On the other hand, if I choose to remain anonymous and I'm rating your review, the rating that I give is actually substantially lower. So 2 is actually very unhelpful, right? So I'm likely to say, no, this review wasn't so great. So you might say, well, OK, but the user has a choice, right? They can either attach their name or not. And maybe the people who like anonymity are actually the grumpy ones. So it's not, So what we did was we looked at the same user when they're choosing to remain anonymous or not. And actually, again, when they attach their name, they're more generous than when they remain anonymous. Right? So it's sort of what you'd expect. So unlike Amazon, where the product can't really rate you back, on Epinions, the others certainly can rate you back. Even in this manner, they could find some of your reviews and downvote them. So there's also some evidence of reciprocity. So how I rate your reviews tends to be correlated with how you rate mine. And so you might say, well, that's just because there's homophily. So if I tend to favor some products and we tend to agree, then it's going to work both ways. However, if we look at the anonymously given ratings, they're far less correlated, right? So there may be evidence of reciprocity where users are intentionally kind of reciprocating the kindness or the unkindness. OK, sorry. I think I'm having slide issues. OK, so the next question is, well, what if you have users who are directly rating other users? And Epinions was, again, kind of smart in the way that Orkut was smart about not showing how others rated you in certain cases. So they make the trust ratings public. so that if I trust you, you're notified. But if I say that I don't trust your reviews, then nothing happens, right? I just won't be shown your reviews. And what we find again is that the trust-trust edges are often reciprocated, but kind of the trust-distrust happens far less often than what you would expect, just based on the proportion of trust-distrust links. Okay, so here we are with CouchSurfing, and CouchSurfing has a whole myriad of different ratings, perhaps to cover all their bases, right? This is the situation where you're not maybe just going to buy a bad product, but you're going to have a pretty bad time if you stay with the wrong person or if you let the wrong person into your house. And most of these are public, so I can specify the friendship level, anything from you're just an acquaintance, never met, acquaintance, couchsurfing friend, which I'll discuss in a little bit, friend, good friend, close friend, best friend, right? You can also specify whether you would vouch for someone, and I'll talk about that as well. And you can leave positive, negative, or neutral references. And the only thing that's private is this trust rating. So I just say how much I trust you, again on a scale from I don't trust you at all to I would trust you with my life. Okay, so prior to 2009, CouchSurfing actually had categories that differentiated positive references from extremely positive references, and they wanted users to use the extremely positive ones rarely, and as you can see, they're used extremely often. And in fact, so because of we have zeros in the data for both no reference was left and neutral, we're not quite sure what the true height of neutral references is, but the ratio of positive to negative is something like 2,500 to 1. So basically no negative references are being written at all. And these are identified, right? If I leave a reference for you, it's like your name's there, my name is there. Okay, and there's really a culture of always leaving references and kind of reciprocating the references. And when we did this survey, CouchSurfing posted a link to our survey, and we got about 500 different responses, and 55% of those individuals said that they always leave a reference. And then of the remaining 45%, half of them said they were too busy, but the remainder gave reasons like, well, it was a neutral or a negative experience, and I just didn't feel comfortable leaving that kind of reference, right? And it could be because individuals are worried about reciprocity. So there's definitely reciprocity in terms of, I prefer the other person to leave a reference first, and then I'll adjust mine so that it matches what they say. Or some, but not all, said, if I host someone and they don't bother to leave a reference, then I also won't leave a reference for them. And so this fear of reciprocal action actually came through even more in statements like, but the big problem is that if you leave a bad reference, what happens then? What will that person say about you? You leave a bad reference and he can do the same, and it's not true. So there's not, the incentives aren't really aligned for leaving a negative reference. But then at the same time, you get examples such as one of our interviewees saying, oh, it didn't feel right at this one place that I stayed. And then I contacted the country ambassador, who's someone who's supposed to be handling different cases. And that person actually knew that several others had had so-so experiences, but this was not reflected on the site, right? So, and then she had regrets for not having left such a reference to kind of let others know. But also, it's not just this fear of reciprocal action, it's that humans are just generally nice, right, and forgiving. And what they're saying is, well, maybe I didn't have such a great time, but who am I to prevent someone else to prevent that person from having a good time with someone else, right? And especially because of the scarcity of negative references, if you leave one, it could really adversely affect that individual. So they're just being nice. They're saying, I didn't have a great time, but maybe someone else will. So what do people actually do in this case? So you just have all of these positive references, but if you look at what an individual would look at when they're deciding whether to stay with someone or have someone stay in their home, references are by far preferred, right? So it's not the number of friends, it's not how close those friends are, it's not whether the person is verified, so whether they kind of submitted their credit card information and their identity is their true identity, or how many vouches they have, right? It's still the references. So how can you get any signal out of references that are, 99% positive? Well, humans are actually quite clever. So what ends up happening is that, let me just read this quote, I've gone pretty keen on what certain references mean, and you can tell when a reference is just like a simpatico nice, you are a nice person reference. She was great, she was very hospitable, she's a great host. That can mean, in a sense, you might be kind of boring. So we humans are able to say, oh, so-and-so is nice, and it's actually a diss, right? Okay, so we can look at reciprocity in other things other than references just because the ratings are so rich. And we can contrast the trust ratings, which are held privately. They're not shown. So this is how A would rate B, and that's how B would rate A. And the correlation there, the Pearson correlation is oh, shoot. OK, sorry. So for friendship, it's 0.73. And for trust, it's just overlapped a bit. It's 0.35, right? So trust is basically not as correlated. And we'd like to say that's because you don't get to see how the other person rated you on trust, right? But in doing this project, we realized that we don't actually know what happens when people are asked to rate trust and friendship. And maybe there's just something inherently different about friendship that makes it more reciprocal than trust. So we actually asked people, which one is easier to select. And we got all sorts of different responses. But some of them did reflect the fact that, the other person's going to see how I rated them, so I have to be really careful in what I select. Yeah, so some of them said friendship is more difficult to rate because the other person's going to see it. But then, interestingly enough, the other person didn't really seem to care, right? So very few people really admitted to caring about whether the friendship was misaligned. They would say, oh, I've never noticed, or, well, it just doesn't matter. So here's someone who is a little bit dissed. I once said one girl was a good friend. However, she added me as an acquaintance. It actually made me feel quite bad to hear that she didn't even consider me as her friend. And others would just say, it's not so great. The other complication is, you're rating on the scale, but CouchSurfing decided to, on the spectrum of don't know this person, acquaintance, all the way to best friend, to insert CouchSurfing friend. And now some people said, oh, well, CouchSurfing friend means that person isn't really that special. If it wasn't for CouchSurfing, I wouldn't really be friends with them, right? But others said, oh, well, everyone I meet through CouchSurfing is a CouchSurfing friend. And so just this decision to label certain numerical values with a label that, in this case, talks about context rather than the strength of the tie, kind of created a whole bunch more anxiety for the users who are trying to use these drop-down menus. OK, so I've kind of brought this up over and over again. So can you really quantify things like trust and friendship? And how does this relate to people's perceptions? So sometimes when we talked with our interviewees, they would just interchangeably use trust and friendship. They would be like, oh, well, I trust that person. I was like, no, I asked you about friendship. Oh, yeah, friendship. OK. But others would point to specific differences. So they would say, well, a close friend you would trust for sure, but you can trust someone without being a close friend. He said, well, OK, we have all this data, millions of ratings, and do we see this asymmetry? And in fact, we did. So here is the range of friendship. So each one of these squares is just, it's darker the more pairs fall into this square. So this is how A to B rates, A rates B on friendship, and how A rates B on trust. And so what you see is that best friends are almost always highly trusted. But if you look at the highest trust rating up there, it actually has a range of friendship levels. So that, in fact, was kind of borne out, that, that best friends are highly trusted, but you can trust people who are not your close friends. Then we got statements such as, well, you know, trust is instantaneous. I shake someone's hand, and I can tell in that instant that they're trustworthy. And others said, no, no, no. You know, it takes some time to figure out whether someone's actually trustworthy. Then you had people who said, well, you know, friendship, that really builds over time. And others who said, oh, we spent, you know, one really nice evening in Paris, and I knew that we'd be best friends for life, right? So which is it? And in the CouchSurfing data, you have self-reported, how long ago did you meet this person, or when did you meet this person? And so we can look at the corresponding rating in friendship and trust, and we see that actually both increase over time, but trust tends to plateau sooner. So we even have this quote, in part it's a question of hours that we stay together. If we still stay together, the level of trust increases, not always, but increases, and sometimes you understand some limitations, so maybe your level of trust can arrive to a certain level, and that's it, it doesn't increase over that level. And in fact, if we, yeah?
I was curious, do you have an explanation for that variation about a year out in the term? Or it dips again and comes back up? I'm just curious if you have any insight into what might be happening.
Oh, no, no, so these are months. So those people have been friends for years. And it's just that there isn't, oh, wow. Well, so, so that's 30 years. 30 years. I don't know what happens around 30 years. It's interesting
I guess there's a few enough out there that a statistical glitch.
It might be a glitch. Yeah. Yep. Okay, so what else does it take? So we did have this how long ago you met. That was more strongly correlated with the friendship level than with the trust level. But also there's an interesting difference in that if you choose to travel with someone, that's a better signal of friendship than it is of trust. And then the other variables tended to track pretty closely and were not as strongly correlated. Of course, the one variable of how well you know each other is also even more strongly correlated than just how long you've known them. So, okay, so you might then start to ask, are even truthful ratings reliable? So what if you ask someone and they're giving you their true rating, maybe you're not going to show it to the other person. Can you still trust them, or are there other factors that might be coming in? So, for example, gender. So, and this might be specific to CouchSurfing, but we found that men, if you look at their distribution of ratings when they're rating others, they tend to rate men and women about equally, right? The distributions are very similar for how they rate their male friends and their female friends. But if you look at women's ratings, they'll tend to rate other women more highly, both on friendship and trust, than they do men. Okay. You can look at geography. So perhaps because closer friends tend to be geographically proximate, but if you're in the same country, you tend to have higher trust and friendship ratings for each other than if you're in a different country. We even looked at, well, maybe it's not just whether you're same country or different country, but maybe it's kind of country specific. So we have these three maps. So this is actually not shaded because there weren't enough ratings for those countries. But in general, darker means higher ratings and lighter means lower ratings. And here, this is Brazilians rating other Brazilians. They tend to be harsher than, you know, I don't know, Americans rating other Americans. The Canadians are nice, yes. but then this also actually is reflected in how they get rated by others, and also how they rate others. So this is Brazil rating other countries, right? So there are these consistencies, and maybe a few inconsistencies are that, for example, Turkey tends to rate within country highly, and they tend to rate other countries highly, but receive slightly lower ratings, right? So there's some interesting country-specific differences, and we only interviewed about 18 people, and half of them were not American, and we didn't even prompt them for this. They would just say, "Oh, the Americans, right? They have an interesting way of putting things. They can write awesome, great, super, but don't mean it. American people, haha, they tend to be very open and very, they help you. Yeah, you're my friend, even though you met them for the first time." Right? So we said, okay, well, let's actually check at the data. If Americans really are so friendly, right, we should see higher average friendship ratings given by Americans, and that's not the case. For example, if you compare them to Western Europeans. And then we said, well, maybe, it's just that they think that everyone's a best friend, and even though they assigned the label best friend to a higher proportion of their contacts, it was very slight. Right? So some of these stereotypes that you would think might carry over actually are not. So this is an example of the ratings actually don't seem to be that biased. We do see actually even ratings correlating across borders. So countries with similar cultural background, Germany and Austria, or the Scandinavian countries tend to rate each other more highly than they do other countries. But this did not bias anything with the Canadians, who don't rate Americans more highly than they do other countries on average. Maybe it's all the jokes we crack at their expense. I don't know. Then there are problems like, you're trying to get people to choose from a scale. But so the first interviewee, I think, was Italian. And so he says, let's say that my level of English is the one that you can hear from me. Best friend, I understand what that means. But between good friend and close friend, I'm not exactly sure what's higher, right? So things that might make sense to us might not make sense in other languages. And then even the expression, you would trust someone with your life, that apparently does not translate into Spanish. And in fact, when you look at the proportion of Spanish-speaking users who chose that, it's significantly lower, right? So there are biases such as those. Then even age, although these effects were very, very slight, it turns out that the more different the ages, the lower the rating. But also, there's this U shape in both the ratings that you are given, that you receive, and the ratings that you give, right? So it's all happy as you get into your early 20s, and then dips as you're in your 30s and 40s, and then you're happy thereafter. Unless you think that that is just couchsurfing data, let me show The Economist covered this study, which is actually people not rating other people, but people rating themselves, or actually how happy they are. And it has the same U-bend, right? And I've also looked at some other data that shows this U-bend with my statistics class, and this is how much sleep you're getting as a function of age. So I'm not sure what the causal mechanism here is, but it could be that less sleep means people perceive you as being grumpy on couchsurfing, and also makes you less happy, or makes you less happy and people like you less. Yeah. Okay, so let me kind of wrap up kind of early by looking at the last type of rating that couchsurfing enables, or at least that we analyzed, which is vouching. So vouching means that you are saying that someone is trustworthy. And the difference here, so all the other ratings you would provide for every person you add as a friend on CouchSurfing. But vouching, you would select who you wanted to vouch for, and you could do so only after 3 others had vouched for you. So it wasn't something that everyone could do, and it formed a small web of trust among a smaller subset of the network. And CouchSurfing also wanted to be sure that you weren't throwing these around too freely, perhaps because of the experience with other ratings, and basically said, you know, you have to be really sure that this person is trustworthy before you vouch for them. And we said, well, okay, so can we predict who's going to vouch for whom? And we did a simple regression. And we found that the most predictive attributes were things like friendship degree, rating of experience, and how they met. So if I leave you a positive reference, if I say you're a good friend, and if we met actually offline instead of through CouchSurfing, then I'm more likely to vouch for you. But we said, okay, you know, we can do some network analysis. We can improve on this. So what if we propagate trust? So if A vouched for B and C, and B and C vouched for D, then can we predict actually that A will vouch for D? Or can we even do things like a global measure, like PageRank, right? PageRank is supposed to work on everything. So if I trust you and you trust someone else and that person trusts someone else, then clearly that person should be trustworthy. And actually, so if we just use PageRank, it's no better than chance. So we just did a balanced sample. The 2-step vouch propagation brought us a few percentage points, just meaning like, yeah, okay, maybe you and your friends have similar opinions. But things, the Jacquard coefficient was just how many friends in common we had. But what really mattered was kind of the direct experience. So this is, again, saying something about we're so used to operating on graphs in a way that they behave well and the rankings work and so on. And I'm guilty of this myself. I've used social networks as just networks where you can, you know, propagate things like you would propagate a disease, which works for hospital networks, but maybe not as well for social networks. Yeah.
Is the problem trust isn't transitive?
So,
what, like the best, the woman of my best friend says of their children, I love my children, but I don't trust them. Not to speak their friends is basically the implication. So it's not transitive, period. In general.
In general. So
people like to believe it is and assume it is, but it isn't.
It isn't, right? It's to a large extent built on your own experience with that person.
Well, you have to look at pairs and then look at the sequence, basically. Anyway.
Yep.
There's some physics, for instance, has the same problem. And then you need matrix metrics. I mean, the scalar metrics don't work anymore. You need vector matrices or tensors, whatever. So they do exist, but it gets very complicated.
Okay. We should talk about this. This is intriguing. Okay. And so in the end, what are you left with when these vouchers are applied? So this is the friendship degree, and so this is just best friend. And very nicely and cooperatively, the users tend to give more vouches proportionally to their best friends, or more of their best friends receive vouches than not. However, because most of the friendship ties are CouchSurfing friends, number 3 here, that means, and even though a small proportion of those friends end up being vouched for, you end up with a lot of vouches that are given to CouchSurfing friends. And now again, maybe some of those friends are really close and the person just uses CouchSurfing friend to label anyone they met through CouchSurfing, but it still kind of suggests that maybe some of these are given too freely. In any case, by the time a user has about 10 friends, it's very high likelihood that they'll be vouched for. So is there this pressure to vouch? And here, nicely enough, we see that at least for the people we interviewed who are a bias sample, they said, hey, I would like to talk to you about CouchSurfing. they don't see vouching as this kind of game, right? So there's one quote, I know some people are engaged in some sort of vouching competition and they're guys with 1,700 vouches. I'm not very much into that sort of thing, and I don't vouch back just because someone vouched for me hoping to get a vouch back. And then others who said, no one ever asked me, I never ask anyone to vouch for me. It's kind of like a taboo thing. You hope that they do, right? So at least in this case, it seems that a combination of factors, first of all, CouchSurfing saying vouches are not to just be given away. You have to give these very sparingly, right? That might have had an effect, although back in the day they were saying, oh, only choose extremely positive for your reference label if it was out of this world, and still everyone chose extremely positive. What we think happened is that this cycle of I'll vouch for you and you'll vouch for me, or I just expect you to vouch for me, was broken by the design feature that not everyone could vouch. Right? So another system where Yuri Leskowitz, who's here, where he found that people are not always totally kind, is the Wikipedia voting system, where you can get voted in to be editor, and actually quite a few of those votes end up with a not approval of the Wikipedia editor to a higher status. Right? And this may be in part because not everyone can vote, etc. And here as well, because not everyone can vouch, you don't automatically expect vouches, or you don't automatically expect reciprocity. And the nice thing about not having every single vouch reciprocated is that there's actually hidden signal. So if we look at the public vouches and we look at the private trust rating, those edges where where the person could have vouched, could have reciprocated, but didn't, actually have lower private trust ratings. So there may be ways of inferring people's private ratings by looking at the absence of ratings as well, and somehow incorporating that, at least in an automated fashion. So to conclude, the basic conclusion is that you can't take these ratings at face value, as I've been doing. There are all sorts of pressures, both concerns for others' reputation, how are they going to rate me back, and just kind of inherent biases that we make because we're human and we're evaluating other humans, and that's inherently subjective, and what is this numerical scale anyway. But we saw a little bit of an example of just the framing of the ratings maybe being able to help elicit things more truthfully. Another thing that we could potentially do that I think would be really fun is to do some natural language processing. And if humans can tell that a reference is just kind of nice but not really recommending that person, maybe an algorithm could do that as well. So that's it. If you'd like more information about this, you can check out my webpage. And if you'd like to talk to me after, please do. Thanks.
Speculative questions.
Yeah.
There are some systems like Facebook-like, which don't even have a negative rating. Is there any way of reading into, say, the empty space of those things? Or like, how do you do analysis where your only options are really positive or nothing?
You'd have to have some way of telling who was exposed but chose not to like. And I think in that sense, Facebook is very socially nice because of the feed algorithm doesn't show you all stories, so there's always plausible deniability. Oh, I didn't like your story. Oh, I didn't see it. It just wasn't shown to me. But I think definitely if you had the baseline of how many people saw it and who chose not to like it, and especially if you had other information like how often does that person like, because I think not everyone interacts in that way, you could infer a whole bunch.
Let's create a situation where you have an information asymmetry where Facebook knows what people don't like, but other people can't tell.
Yeah. But they can use it for good. They can make even better algorithms, right? By knowing what you don't like. Yeah. Yeah.
So it seemed like, at least in my estimation, semantically, trust seems to be sort of directional. Where, I mean, I can say that I trust you, and I can understand that you may not trust me, but friendship, at least the way that I guess I would use it, I mean, is pretty bidirectional. Whereas if I say that we're friends, like, I'm estimating in my mind that you're going to think the same way.
Yeah, so we were actually really interested in this question as well, and I don't have the slide handy, but if I can translate it to what we thought we could measure. So if what we actually thought was maybe trust, okay, maybe it's not the same thing, but we thought maybe trust is a property of the individual. So someone is inherently trustworthy, which would mean that if we look at the kind of normalized variance of the trust rating that they receive, normalized by the distribution of trust scores for someone with the same number of friends, because you would expect if you have lots of friends, you have lots of weak ties, and maybe that brings your trust score down, which it does. So we kind of normalized by, you know, everyone who has the same number of friends, and we looked at the variance of the trust rating and the variance of the friendship rating. The idea being that if friendship is really bidirectional, then you should have greater variance, because with some people you're kind of best friend, right? And with other people you're not as close friend. And we did find a little bit of an effect for that. So the variance was smaller for trust, meaning that kind of people would perceive the same way. But it was very slight. It wasn't this kind of like trust is just how trustworthy you are and friendship is between people. We didn't, at least the way we measured it, we couldn't show that as strongly.
Kind of ambiguous CouchSurfing friends category, since maybe people were perceiving it differently?
We did not do that. Okay, yeah, I'll do.
One of the places where trust is key and is the less symmetricalness is like eBay, where the community buyers and sellers aren't supposedly the same exactly.
Yeah.
Do you see that phenomena in the way trust is rated there?
So I do think that they had, just because of the reciprocity issue, I think that what they do, which they didn't do initially, is that you have to, if you're the seller, you have to rate the buyer as soon as you receive payment, and then the buyer rates after, to avoid this, you know, the buyer gives you a bad rating and then the seller kind of reciprocates with a bad rating back. But I think in eBay, at least the one time I played with it and bought something, which then was cheaper on Amazon anyway, but I just wanted to know the experience. It seems like it's the opposite of CouchSurfing vouching, where for vouching they say don't give this out too freely. For my purchase, where it took forever to get it, and they charged me, I don't know, some amount for shipping, and it was far less, and it kind of arrived in half a, you know, it was a book, and it wasn't in such great shape, and so I thought I'd rate it as neutral, and I got all of this feedback from eBay, like, make really sure that you want to give this neutral and not positive, right? So I'm not quite sure what signal that data would have. Right. I don't know if that answered your question or not.
Yeah, just, I mean, because sort of the larger question is, how do these, so different, CouchSurfing is a really interesting social phenomenon, and it's only one of those phenomena where trust plays a role in what you do, and so
right.
ways it's different in the different social settings.
Yes, yes. So with CouchSurfing, trust means pretty specific things. So one of the worst things that can, or one of the most annoying things that can happen is that you arranged for someone to host you and you arrive at 11 p.m. in that city and they're not answering their doorbell, right? So trust is, you know, trusting that someone will be there to receive you, or even if you're a host and you've put off other plans and you're waiting for this guest and they don't arrive. Right, versus typically in everyday life, if someone, you know, doesn't show up, you're like, oh well, you know, something came up. And there's also especially for women, there's the trust that you're going to be safe, right? And in online transactions, it means something entirely different, that it's going to be shipped promptly and in good condition. And yeah.
So I'm curious as to, so here it seems like trust and friendship are not very well correlated. But how about other attributes like helpfulness or other such things? Where would you speculate to fall on the spectrum? You know, you can trust people, but you can't be. I'm sorry. You can trust people without being friends with them. Versus, you know, can they be helpful without being friends with them too? What do you think?
I don't know. I think I'd need to get the data. It's also, I think it's also kind of context specific, but if you are asking about strength of tie, going back to the Gilbert and Carahalio's study, I think they were using a fairly standard set of kind of questions to probe the strength of the friendship. And there are things like asking for help or offering help that tend to be pretty integral to friendship. I'm not sure how it would translate to trust. I mean, in some ways they're correlated, but you'd have to get data. Yeah.
So after all this research, do you think you've sort of uncovered any sort of guiding principle about what you would do to create a rating system that does give you a clean signal? Because it seems that
I think private ratings. The problem with those is that it's difficult for the users to perceive value. So, for example, with the trust ratings on CouchSurfing, right? People give those, but then they kind of forget about them and they don't really know what they're for. So unless you make it, so at least at the time that we were doing the study, when you add a friend, you can't really add them until you fill these things in. So that's one way of getting them. But of course there are lots of, so just to complete the story, right? If it would be natural that over time your trust may deepen or your friendship may deepen and you would go back and update these things. And they're very, very rarely updated because the CouchSurfing site is not really a place where you kind of hang out and, you know, connect with these friends. You kind of connect initially and then your lives go on, maybe together, maybe apart, but you don't have to update that on CouchSurfing. So if there's some way of getting people to maintain this, but not really showing it to the other person, I think you would get pretty okay ratings. Yeah. Yeah.
So sometimes people would say that someone's a good judge of character. Have you looked at anything in terms of seeing whether certain people's perceptions or ratings are more valuable than others, and apply that to maybe looking at transitive relationships?
Ooh.
Like, how would you do that?
I don't know. I guess you could. I guess maybe one way to test it is to look at the very few cases where someone did receive a negative reference and see which of the people who rated them ahead of time maybe rated them low on trust or something like that. Another way, I mean, what I do when I'm reviewing papers is I like to, once I submit my review, find out that my review is kind of in line with what the other reviewers said. So there may be a way to tell whether someone tends to give the average rating. But then again, we know that the average rating is skewed or, you know, influenced by various factors. So you may actually need to look at the outliers or, you know, the ratings where something did go wrong and see if there were people who flagged that, but then did not flag, you know, people who ended up being totally okay. Yeah. I don't know. I never really thought of that. That maybe they're better raters than others when it comes to humans. Of course, in other ways, yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Thanks.
For more, please visit us at stanford.edu.